Picture a father so twisted, so cruel, he made his 6-year-old son run on a treadmill right until he collapsed. The shocking footage you're about to see captures the relentlessness of the abuse nobody dared to stop. How could this have happened? What did go so terribly wrong? Little Corey Micciolo got failed by the system. And this was more than tragic. But what's truly horrific is what authorities found when they looked closer. It is really the story of how one man's monstrous acts were literally looked over by everyone until it was too late. You might think you have seen evil, but you've not yet heard the full story. Christopher Gregor was a native of New Jersey, a father of one, and professionally he operated as a mechanic. His son Corey Micciolo was to Gregor and his former associate Samira Figueroa. The two had a troubled relationship that concluded with joint custody of Corey. To persons well apprised of the situation, Gregor was controlling and ruling. He carried this out in his parenting as well. The first few years of Corey's life were confrontational, with several occurrences of hard punishment that Figueroa had been concerned with, as had several others, well before the killing event. Superficially, Gregor was a regular-looking man, but there were warning signs that he would become increasingly violent. Relatives and friends reported that Gregor's punishment of Corey was severe, that bruising or other harm had become relatively common. Samira Figueroa reported her suspicions multiple times about Gregor's treatment of Corey, yet her efforts to trigger action from Child Protective Services often reached dead ends, a systemic failure that later became a point of focus in the case. These warnings were echoed in multiple reports filed to Child Protective Services, yet despite these alerts, the system failed to effectively intervene, thus allowing Gregor custody over Corey. The crime on April 2, 2021, all hell broke loose when 6-year-old Corey Micciolo was found in Gregor's home lifeless. Gregor had called 911, stating Corey had tripped, and he hurt himself while playing on a local playground. He was rushed immediately to the hospital. Unfortunately, it was too late. Corey was badly injured, and he was pronounced dead upon his arrival. What transpired to Corey that day was in fact more heinous. Surveillance footage from Gregor's apartment building depicted the man making the youth run on a treadmill at high speeds, effectively exercising him in a way while also verbally and physically assaulting him if he showed signs of slowing down. This abuse on March 20, 2021, just days prior to the incident, proved pivotal evidence that worked to show the ongoing nature of the torment that Corey experienced. This continued abuse, which was even captured on camera, was the direct cause of Corey's fatal injuries. The autopsy showed that Corey died from blunt force trauma. His body showed signs of prolonged abuse by way of deep bruises, fractures, and internal injuries. Very shockingly, most of the X-rays of Corey's injuries were so severe that the medical examiner mentioned some fractures were at the healing levels of stages, which showed that Corey was abused over an extended period. The most damning pieces included surveillance footage obtained from Gregor's apartment complex, and 2 children were taken directly from Gregor's apartment. The video showed Gregor making Corey run at high speeds on the treadmill, all the while accosting him and physically attacking him anytime the boy tried to or attempted slowing down or stopping. The medical examiner's report further corroborated that Corey died of blunt force trauma to the chest and abdomen and classified the death as a homicide on March 3, 2022. It was not an isolated incident, as more videos showed Gregor acting equally abusively on other occasions. Once it became clear how Corey had died, Gregor immediately became a person of interest for law enforcement. An harrowing pattern showed Corey was living in constant threat and physical abuse over the past months, an investigation revealed. During the investigation, evidence showed that as early as March 20, 2021, Gregor had committed abuse just days before the child's death. The involvement of Child Protective Services, or the lack thereof, started to become a critical issue as it began to unravel that several complaints had been filed about Gregor and his treatment of Corey. Despite those complaints, Corey was never taken out of his father's custody. After more thorough investigation into Gregor's actions and evidence produced that did implicate him, law enforcement officials formally filed charges of first-degree murder, child endangerment, and aggravated assault against him. The charges were filed based on the ghastly long-term abuse Corey had suffered. Gregor was finally convicted on May 31, 2024, after an almost 6-week trial. He was convicted of aggravated manslaughter and was given a sentence of 20 years in behind bars. He also was sentenced to an additional 5 years for child endangerment, an aggregate of 25 years to serve in New Jersey State Prison. Because of New Jersey's No Early Release Act, Gregor will have to serve at least 85% before he may be eligible for parole, meaning he will likely serve the better half of his life in prison. This makes it relevant that the prosecution stressed the fact that the death was not an accident, but premeditated abuse, in which a cruel premeditation was actually desired on the son by Gregor. Gregor was ultimately convicted in all charges that were brought against him, including first-degree murder. Initially, the case had a charge of murder, but later, after a long and laborious process of reading and rereading evidence, testimonies at the trial, and proceedings, it came to the conviction of the so-called aggravated manslaughter. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without eligibility for parole. The harsh sentence is not only a reflection of the seriousness of his crime, but also of the systemic failures that allowed this kind of abuse to go on unchecked. He is behind bars facing the severity of his crime and the probability that he will never have another opportunity to harm a child. Further investigation into Gregor's actions and evidence produced implicating him, charges of first-degree murder, child endangerment, and aggravated assault were filed against him by law enforcement officials. The physical abuses that Corey had suffered in the most ghastly ways over a long period were the basis for filing the charges. Finally, on May 31, 2024, Gregor convicted after a nearly 6-week trial. He had been sentenced to 20 years in for aggravated manslaughter. For child endangerment, another additional 5-year sentence was given, an aggregate of 25 years to serve in New Jersey State Prison. Due to New Jersey's No Early Release Act, Gregor will have to do a minimum of 85% before he is eligible for parole, which in all essence means he will be serving the better half of his life in prison. That is why it is relevant for the prosecution, as a declaration by them that the death was not an accident, but a premeditated abuse, in which cruel premeditation was actually desired on the son by Gregor. Eventually, Gregor was found guilty of all charges against him, which included first-degree murder. The case had a charge of murder in the beginning, but in a painstakingly slow and cumbersome process of reading and rereading evidence, testimonies heard at the trial, and also the proceedings, it came out the conviction of so-called aggravated manslaughter. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The sternness of such a sentence reflects not only the gravity of his crime, but multiple layers of systemic failures that allowed this kind of abuse to go unchecked. He sits behind bars, facing the severity of his crime and the likelihood he will never again have an opportunity to harm a child. Thanks for watching. We'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on this tragedy? Did the system fail, Corey? Let us know your comments below. If you found this story as shocking as we did, be sure to give us a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more deep dives into true crime stories. Hit that notification bell so you never have to miss any update. See you in the next video.